Chapter 12, Gospel of the Pantheon. The Death of the Emoticons, Verse 1. Forgive me, long-suffering reader, but Curtis once again has plans that may not correlate well with your interest or entertainment, or willingness to keep reading, I fear. So please skip this chapter. This is the last of these. Curtis has told me himself. I'm thrilled to participate in bringing this missing gospel into the world. I just wish Curtis would let me excise this chapter and put it into some other gospel, other channeled work. The gospel must be accessible to the people, and this kind of dense theological writing is anything but. Still, I can't defy Curtis. I have faith that his must be the right decision, even if I don't get why. So here's the last chapter of the arrival of the emoticons. Verse 2. As one can deduce from its name, the very beginning did come to an end, and the end of the very beginning corresponded with the end of the end for the emoticons. Now, in contemporary parlance, the term emoticon has come to have a secondary meaning. It is used to describe a shorthand favored by individuals communicating via digitized text. And this secondary meaning is so prevalent that amongst children and the ignorant, it is sometimes believed to be the primary or even the only meaning of the word. But of course, the term was co-opted from earlier scripture that mentioned but did not elaborate upon the emoticons. The emoticons had been traversing space for a good portion of the duration of the very beginning. Precisely how long was hard to say, but it was a goodly length of time for sure. And eventually they arrived at the world. They had fled their own dying world, and after an eternity of unpleasant travel under less than ideal conditions, i.e. the frigid vacuum of deep space, the road-weary creatures were so relieved to discover the world that they simply threw themselves down upon it with such fervor that the impact killed them. It is commonly believed that when our own world nears the end, all of humanity shall coalesce into the rebirth of the myriad emoticons, and we shall flee our own end, thinking to escape destiny, only to do to some yet unborn race, just as the emoticons did unto us, which is to say, or so speculation goes, that having denied our very end its due, but having exhausted its allotted scope nonetheless, we shall then have no choice but to traverse the very beginning until we reach another world, whereupon we shall crash, all of us except one, upon the surface of that world, and liberate the inhabitants there from the perfect state of blessed robotic mind. Again, this is just speculation. But the emoticons did come and crash upon our world. We know that much for sure. They released onto the people all of the feelings of humanity, such as joy and envy and anger and love, and in doing so they mostly severed the people's perfect communion with the articles of the universe, and thereby broke the endless state of blessed robotic mind that the people had up until then enjoyed. Which was just the thing that needed to happen. But most of all, we are grateful to Lord Alienator for that single emoticon, loving himself above all his brethren, and loving himself more than the people or the articles of the universe even, and believing himself above all else important, chose to pull his own descent towards the world up short, and he joined Precreator and Accutron as a god above the people. Thereby did Alienator become the third god of the Pantheon. We are grateful to him for making this choice, because had he followed the lead of his brethren and crashed onto the world, all access to the articles of the universe would have been solidified, and the people's capacity to channel immortal truth would have become wholly severed. If that had happened, the people would have been doomed forever to purposelessness and pettiness, and endless squabblings over conflicting and static moral truths. So Alienator's arrival marked the great shift in the world. The lifeless husks of the myriad other emoticons lay strewn about the world and decayed, but being a different variety of fleshy creature than the creatures native to this world, the decomposition of emoticon flesh emitted a thick and befuddling scent, as physical and unavoidable as rain. It smelled as warm, sleeping dog. It was a good smell. The winds mixed the air of the old world, air that had heretofore not carried complex smells, with the smell of rotting emoticons. The primitive pre-olfactosphere gathered the smell and mixed with it the smells generated by they who newly smelled the rot. These were the smells of both persons and beasts, the smells of the living. Thus did the visceral experience, i.e., the olfactosphere, of the physical pseudo-article, i.e., the living system that is the world, achieve maturity and coordination with the system as a whole. Do not undervalue the significance of the wafting odor of a Emoticon carcass 3 days dead, festering beneath the relentless sun of a young world and smelling agreeably of warm sleeping dog. It was a very important smell, for it was critical to the final awakening of the world and of the people. 1 week after the arrival, impact, and then death of the penultimate Emoticon straggler, all of the world and all of the people had become fully made. The very last Emoticon, you will recall, was Alienator himself. The women people, as they began the slow awakening on the first morning, began to insexualate themselves with their fingers and with the branches of saplings stripped of bark and with all manner of natural thing in the world that was easily moistened and slid across flesh. Soon enough, one of these women reached orgasm. Then Entropotripocles became manifest unto the world, and within a week of his arrival, hurrah! The first of the fully made women menstruated. It was before that inaugural bloodletting, however, though after the insexualization of the women, that the first of the fully human men discovered that by sufficient agitation might they ejaculate. And certainly it is not so hard to accept that each of the large majority of males was able to locate upon his body specifically the flesh to be agitated. It was pleasure, then, that opened the floodgates to the whole of the realized world, and because people then were very much the same as people are now, they were mostly neither subtle nor sophisticated nor patient in their appetites. This is why, one way or another, each of the people headed straight for their own genitals. It was more convenient that way. So it was that the making of the world was an autosexual act, which also, incidentally, explains why, to this day, people get horny when they smell a warm sleeping dog. Verse 3. Now one last quantity of gospel regarding Alienator must here be channeled before I return to the history of Rigoberto Releghetti, as it is needed to understand the actions of Captain Baker and the eventual breaking of the Duke's romantic attachment to the Duchess. A meaning-smith may exercise his power over single individuals, and might manifest mortal truth into art deftly enough, for example, to compel a particular girl to sleep with him. The mechanism by which this occurs is as follows. The meaning-smith, by way of cleverness and force of mortal will, seizes power from Alienator, and uses it to elevate a given piece of media into mortal truth. This truth, the manifestation of the will of the meaning-smith, then becomes true for she to whom it is intended to control, provided she can be persuaded to experience the media, usually text. That last element, the necessity that the target of the spell willingly consume it, explains why meaning-smiths must work in secret and must disguise their work, as bearing the signature of some other god. But once the media is consumed, the meaning-smith's truth becomes the target's truth, and his will becomes her will, and his goal is achieved. Of course, the media has to be pretty stunning. It is not so easy to seize power from a god, but it does happen. Regardless, such a scenario is the classic example of the so-called simple alienatorial power, and it is well understood and explains why meaning-smiths are so universally hated and feared. It is easy to understand why there is no church of Alienator. The effective use of his power requires disguise. What is less commonly known is that these same principles work on a macro level. Wherever there is a general consensus about a given meaning, with or without meaning-smithing magic behind it, that meaning becomes true for as far afield as that truth is obvious. However, should some party from a faraway point Should some party from afar point out the malleability of that truth to a person of sufficient will and with sufficient motivation, then the force of Alienator regarding that consensus truth over the person so notified becomes weakened, and if that person is a meaning-smith of sufficient skill, consensus can be broken or even reshaped into a different consensus. And if this meaning-smith at that point seizes and applies alienatorial magic, he can cause a new truth to take hold, and this new truth will become reality for all within range. That's fun. That's a fun chapter to read out loud.